Well, good afternoon and happy Thursday to everybody tuning in to this very special and quickly organized conversation. My name is Ilkka Turunen. I'm the field CTO here at Sonotype. Joining me today is also Brian Fox and co-founder, CTO of Sonotype. Hey, Brian, how's it going?
Hi, how's everyone?
So, we've got a bit of an interesting chat today. It's not a breaking vulnerability, but it affects the vulnerability infrastructure that we all rely on in the cybersecurity profession and in sort of the wider professional landscape. So, what we want to talk about today and have a discussion about is about the National Vulnerability Database. So, very briefly, for those joining in who might not know what this is, the National Vulnerability Database is essentially what it says on the tin, a database of vulnerabilities run by the US National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST for short. And it essentially contains a catalog of known software security vulnerabilities. National Vulnerability Database, because it obviously was first built in the US, but it's widely used and referenced by nearly every tool, government, infrastructure on the planet. It's essentially the central location where, when we discover a new security vulnerability, that security vulnerability essentially goes to live as a sort of official catalog. And inside of that catalog, essentially, when you find and discover a new vulnerability, that's the expectation is that you open a security vulnerability, it gets an official CVE code, or Common Vulnerability Enumeration code, and after that, it's an official casting code vulnerability that then is consumed by whoever wants to know if there are any security vulnerabilities that might affect you, and then do something. So, with that background information in mind, it's a pretty core part of the infrastructure in the industry for tracking and knowing about security vulnerabilities. Brian, there's been kind of a bit of an alarming development that's happened there over the last month. So, what do you fill us in?
Yeah, so this is one of these slow burn things that I think is certainly it didn't come across my desk until yesterday, and I think that's kind of the collective feedback I've heard from a lot of people that nobody really recognized what was happening. There was no announcement made, but this image here, credit Josh Bressers for putting this together. I know it's small, you can't see it, but the takeaway here is that about a month ago, new vulnerabilities being published into the database stopped having additional metadata assigned to them. So this would be, I believe, the CVSS score, so the severity. But importantly, what we're here to talk about today is the common platform enumerator, the coordinate system that actually defines what piece of software is affected. So where you see the red lines on that chart stopping, and all of the green ones continuing, the green ones are new vulnerabilities that have been put into the system for which any tools or systems that depend upon this information to know what to actually flag as being affected has none of that data. So there's been a huge influx of new vulnerabilities being inserted. I think that big spike there possibly has to do with the Linux system coming online, and they've been backfiling a lot of issues. But still, the point being, lots of new issues are being filed, and there's no metadata being attached to them that would allow tools to actually reason about what this means. And I think that's a huge deal that most people don't know about.
Yeah, I think it's worth taking a step back really and talking a little bit about that, about the chart, and what it really means, because essentially when you submit a security vulnerability into the NVD, it's sort of a two-step process, isn't it? There's the vulnerability itself, and then there's the analysis that they perform. And sort of what you just said there is something that's really been sort of the eye-opening moment for a lot of us in this industry. Is they've essentially stopped doing step two of the process, which is to take that initial report and associate it with with the components that are affected, and a whole host of other types of metadata. And in fact, what you saw in that diagram that you just shared, Brian, that backlog is growing by the day. I think at this stage, I'm literally just looking at the official dashboard of the NVD. There's about 3,000 security vulnerabilities that are currently awaiting analysis, and that backlog continues to grow day by day by day. I think it was 2,800 yesterday, so it really is growing quite fast.
Yeah, the concerning thing is that there hasn't been a public statement about exactly why this is happening. I mean, you could speculate. I don't think that's going to help, but it's not an outage per se. I think that's the important thing. It's not like something broke, other than maybe the process, maybe funding, maybe staffing, maybe the water finally exceeded the dam. We don't actually know, but it's not a case of like just cross your fingers, it'll be back in a couple hours once they plug the device back in. That doesn't not seem to be the situation here. The reason that I didn't notice it at first is because our tools, since we started this, more than 12 years ago, haven't relied on the CPE. The CPE has been problematic sort of since maybe not quite since the beginning. It was designed for sort of a different purpose. So if we want to think about the coordinate system, in the CPE, it's broken up as, is this a hardware or software, right? So everything we're talking about here is related to software. What is the vendor? So in an open source project, the vendor might be Apache Software Foundation. What is the project or the product? And in that case, it could be something like struts, right? And then what is the affected version? That's what the CPE codes. We found long ago when we started, well, first, most vulnerabilities didn't even have a CPE filled in way back in the day, and we had to build systems to compensate for that. But the other problem with the coordinate system is it's not precise enough to deal with the realities of component-based development. The struts project has, the last time I looked, something like 84 different submodules in it. And so when a vulnerability comes in and it gets associated to Apache struts, some version, tools that rely on the CPE are going to provide false positives for basically 83 of the 84 different components, because it's typically the same piece of code doesn't exist in multiple places in these submodules. And so that's the work we've always had to do to provide more precise data and better matching, because we knew that relying on that, well, A, it wasn't populated most of the time when we started, and B, when it was, it still wasn't precise enough. So we've had to build systems and tools and enabling technologies to help our researchers more precisely align these things. And so we don't actually depend upon the CPE, which is why it didn't bubble up to my desk until just yesterday. But I think the important thing for people to recognize is that many tools out there do in fact depend upon the CPE, especially tools that came along, in an era where the CPE was more commonly populated. They might have taken a shortcut and just used that field. And so we've long tried to educate the market that this approach is not a good one. It's going to lead to a lot of false positives and can lead to false negatives in many cases. But what's happening right now, effectively, is any tool that's doing that is now not providing any new information about this. So you might have noticed you're not getting many new alerts, and it's not because the bad guys have taken the day off or because the researchers aren't finding new things. It's literally because of this process happening at the NVD, and that your tool is relying on it and is now effectively blind to what's going on.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really worth kind of belaboring that point, actually, Brian, because really what that means is they are filing new security vulnerabilities into the database. That's still happening. They're flowing in. Things are coming in. But what's not happening, crucially, is that identification, creating that sort of association between the target component and that security vulnerability. And as you mentioned, it's long been known that actually the coordinate system that they designed with the CPE is not really fit for purpose. It's not detailed enough. They're often filled in wrong. They're quite coarse. And part of the reason for that is it's kind of an impossible task without significant funding and backing to be able to do that. And the NVD takes a huge amount of security vulnerabilities in. So part of the things that we ended up doing as a business long time ago is ending up solving it on our side by actually double checking, enriching, doing a lot of different things to ensure that those associations are correct. Because in the when you're creating security vulnerabilities for hardware vulnerabilities, like playing Tina Turner to a laptop, so the hard disk breaks, right? That level of fidelity of what's vulnerable is very different to this particular submodule of Spring happens to have REST API vulnerability on this particular class file, which is really in the software world the resolution that we need. So what's ending up happening is if you're relying on free open source tools, you're not getting the alerts because even though the vulnerabilities are in the system, that association is missing. So when they check for, hey, does this component X have a known security vulnerability in the NVD, the answer will come out as empty or at least nothing new because that association crucially is missing. That's really the kind of practical implication. And many vendors and many in this business, really what they do is they just download a dump of the database because they give you a JSON API and it used to give you a lovely little extract as well that you could download. And unfortunately, that's obviously not going to get populated now. So you're really kind of driving blind, even though it feels like everything is working.
Right, and the way this is quote unquote failing, it's not obvious that that's happening, right? If the API was down, you would be getting alerts that, hey, my system is broken. Instead, you're getting a false negative. You're getting back that a message that says, yeah, there's no vulnerabilities on this thing. So it's not obvious that that it's not working, and that's why we wanted to kind of have this conversation to make sure people understand the implications of that. And this is true, by the way, not just of software dependencies, the world that Sonatype lives in. This is true for any tool, right? So there could be operating system level, there could be device level types of vulnerabilities in that set that's also not being matched. So this problem, because there's so many different sides to security. There's application security and network security and hardware security. All of those vulnerabilities get dumped into the NVD. This problem, as I understand it, will apply globally across all of those, right?
That's absolutely correct. And now that's the thing. The NVD really is one of the central sources of all of this information. So as an aside, this is a good reminder that a lot of the infrastructure that we rely on, even at this level, is surprisingly brittle and has no guarantee that it can work or it will work to the standard that you expect, because there truly is no service obligation to something like this.
Yeah, yeah, it's something that we're starting to see across the open source ecosystem at large. I heard a stat the other day that a very large open source project, every time they do a release, it costs $60,000 in compute resources to run the integration tests. And that shocked even me. And, I look at big numbers in terms of how much it costs to keep Maven Central running on a yearly basis, and was caught off guard by the fact that every time they do a release, they spend $60,000 in machine. And that's donated by companies that are invested in that. But,
Oh.
It's sort of interesting that, when open source started and became popular, it thrived on people like us donating our time, whether our time was our spare time or if it was our employer's time. We were donating our time, and we were doing builds on our machines or some machines that were donated, but it didn't really have an extra cost. But you fast forward to modern day with integration tests and agile and CI/CD, that's how software is developed. Those things are not free, and it's true for open source. So while you can show up and donate your time and write some code, somebody else has to be paying the bill to actually produce the machine that's running it, which is increasingly in the cloud, which is a best practice. Like, we talk these days about, wait a minute, that thing was built on just one person's random laptop. How do I know I can trust that laptop? So our expectations are that the way things got done before aren't done anymore. But that costs money. It costs real money, and this is an interesting conversation that's just starting to come up. And I think, we've seen such a massive rise in the number of vulnerabilities being reported for lots of reasons. that maybe we finally got to the point where the NVD just simply can't keep up. Like, we don't actually know, like I said at the beginning, what the underlying cause of this is, but
Mm.
certainly that can't help.
No, no, agreed 100%. And when you add on the pressures that this industry is going to go through over the next few years, with sort of the increased regulation requiring, further awareness of, do you have any known exploitable vulnerabilities in your software and in your releases, even though it doesn't directly affect open source, the demand for something like the NVD and the sort of reliance on it is just going to increase. So I think it's kind of sort of a sobering moment, I think, for anyone relying on that, to be able to understand that it is it's sort of not a immutable resource. It can go away, and these things can happen. It's like essentially you're ordering a meal box, and then like half of it is missing, and you're still paying the same price.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's an interesting situation. So, again, take a look at your tools. What are you using for, your software composition analysis? And frankly, any of your security tools. Like I said, it's not just
Mm.
in our space; it's any of the spaces. If they're not producing any alerts lately, or if the number of those things are significantly decreased over the last month, that would be a pretty good indicator that maybe they're not enriching the data, that the vendor is not doing it, or the tool is not doing it, and therefore, you're missing a whole lot.
Yeah, and this particular set of data, I mean, it shows up everywhere. When you run a package install on an operating system, and you see those alerts about security vulnerabilities, it might prop up there. You're still going to get the historical alerts, but what's going to be missing is sort of CVE 2024 type codes, because those associations don't exist. My favorite one was I saw someone show me a procurement system with like, hey, here are known security vulnerabilities with this particular product. So it's going to show up in weird and random places like that as well. And I just want to emphasize again that as a vendor, we actually ended up solving this problem independently well over 10 years ago, for the explicit reason that the sort of association system is not really fit for purpose when it comes to software dependency type security vulnerabilities in the first place. So our customers, of course, are going to be unaffected by this, but it's going to show up in these weird and wonderful places with like the little script tools and other sort of software that has some vulnerability awareness. Maybe they've developed a quick feature or something like that, and is actually under the hood just basically an NVD export. That's where this is really going to be a sort of pain if you're relying on any of that sort of information.
Yeah, and since it's impossible to know what you're missing, you need a place to go. I mean, go to our website. We have free tools that help you do this. You can take a look at the results, compare them to what you're getting out of your other tool. Because again, we're not affected by this, you'll be able to see what those associations are.
Yeah, and I think worthwhile also to mention, a conversation you were actually having yesterday was with someone who was maintaining an open source project, and the question was really, what should smaller projects that don't necessarily have enterprise funding to buy enterprise tools to help this, what should they do?
Yeah, I mean, OSS Index is one of those free tools that we have that you could do some lookups to see some of that limited information. That's not the only one. We have some other vulnerability scanners. So yeah, you could find those on our website, and see what they are. But that's kind of the answer I gave. The other answer I gave was kind of in a different vector, that ultimately I think it's a false economy if you're trying to do this by hand in 2024 because you're trying to save money. You're really just wasting a ton of time trying to do something and not getting the benefit of the economy of scale. So, in a world where highly sophisticated nation state actors are looking to exploit all of these things against us, saying I have no money to do this even remotely well is just not a good answer.
No.
And so you can't rely on heroes anymore to try to, while they have their morning coffee, search for latest NVDs in the repository to see if you're vulnerable or not. That's a recipe for disaster, no matter what size your company is. There's
Absolutely.
lots of tools. There are inexpensive, there are free tools that can help do this.
Yeah, and I think another thing to say about that is if you have a workflow that relies on a human manually saying yes or no to these things, you're going to get drowned. Especially if that backlog ever gets resolved, it's going to grow day by day. Into a larger thing. There's no end in sight. There's been really no announcement on when that might be solved. So all of that's going to land on that morning coffee Joe's desk one day, and that'll be a very long backlog to skim through. So if anything, now's a good chance to be rethinking a little bit about how those things should be done. A lot of these sort of free and cheap tools really rely on this sort of entirely human-led manual curation thing, and that unfortunately is going to be a very, very effortful task whenever those backlogs get unjammed, if ever.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, if you're doing this at any kind of scale, that's what we do. That's our bread and butter, right?
Yep.
So we're able to help people all the way across the spectrum is the point. We want you to know that this is happening, so you could take a look and make that you're not lulled into a false sense of security. That's really what we're trying to get across here.
Absolutely. Do check your alerts. Do look at those trends. If you've noticed a slowdown, that's probably what it is. This isn't an easy thing to grok, but if you go and look at a few security vulnerabilities in the NVD, you'll notice they've got a big yellow bar that says awaiting review. That's going to get increasingly more popular. So you'll know that that's one of those vulnerabilities that hasn't hit this review queue yet.
The problem is you don't know which ones to look at. Yeah. You don't know what you're looking for. You might
exactly because you're never going to know of them. But if you get a link or something like that, you can grab an eyeball. But not an easy problem to solve. Not straightforward. Something to really be aware of. And it certainly it was not on my 2024 bingo card to say that the core infrastructure of cybersecurity would be taken down kind of like this.
Yeah, likewise. Definitely did not see this coming.
Brilliant. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in for this conversation. Brian, always a pleasure. One day we should do a happier chat, about something positive. Until then, until next time, stay safe out there, and we'll take it from there.
All right. Bye, everyone.